Welcome, everyone. Good morning. Welcome to our first HR Chatbot webinar. My name is Raf Rotiers. I'm partner at BridgeX. Now, before we get started, just some practical messages. We will be recording this webinar, so we can share the recording afterwards. We have muted everybody. If there are any questions, please use the Q&A window. Don't hesitate to enter those questions during the webinar. We will get to them at the end of this session. We aim to finish this webinar at around a quarter or 10 to 12. Let's start things off first with a poll. We want to know who's in this webinar. And the first question is, how familiar are you with chatbots? Are you just curious? Are you just looking for various ways to enhance your employee experience for your company? Are you interested in chatbot technology but have no concrete plans yet? Are you already actively considering using chatbots for HR? Or are you already building chatbots for HR or other domains? We'll show the results in a minute. Here come the results. Okay, so most of you are just curious. Good to know, good to see. We hope we can answer a lot of your questions today. If you're curious, we have some that are already interested in chatbot technology, and even some that are actively considering using chatbots for HR. I would say you're all in the right place. Okay, let's get things started. We will first run through some of the basics of HR chatbots or chatbots in general. We will explain a couple of very interesting use cases in HR and then talk about the business value chatbots can bring. Let's start with some history, a brief timeline. The first chatbot ever, Eliza, was developed by an MIT professor in the 60s. It used a script that simulated a psychotherapist. Jabberwocky was created in the 80s. The entertaining bot aimed to simulate a natural conversation. There are more chatbots between then and 2011, but the milestone of 2011 is very important. A Chinese company created the WeChat platform, and it still exists today. It turned into a very popular social media platform. Another big milestone was in 2016 when Facebook opened up the possibility to produce chatbots on their platform. A lot of chatbots popped up. We see in 2018 that the first assistants were created for businesses, and that's when chatbots were created in e-commerce, healthcare, education, and customer services. 2019 was the year that businesses started to invest in internal chatbots, mostly because they wanted to reproduce the customer service that they created for their customers towards their employees, their internal employees. What the future will bring, we're not sure. We think that chatbots and AI will integrate across channels beyond text and voice, picking up even more emotions in speech and text. Now, we're not here to talk about general chatbots. You want to hear about HR chatbots, of course, and there's nobody better to run us through the HR chatbots than our resident chatbot specialist, Boudewijn Daal.
Thank you, Raf, and good morning, everyone. So how do we go about demystifying what chatbots are? So a nice starting point would obviously be to bring up a very sharp definition. But the reality is that when we look at the literature that is dealing with the topic, that you'll find a lot of diverse statements around it. And none of them really do chatbots any justice, because some will oversimplify while others will represent them as very complex and confusing platforms. So a better way of introducing chatbots is to first of all avoid comparing them with traditional standalone applications, but really look at them more as a solution with a number of concepts that always come back. Now, if you mash up the most common definitions, you will notice that a number of terms keep coming back, and we see that a little bit reflected here in the word clouds. So let's focus on some of those terms, even if a couple of them might come across a bit as buzzwords. First thing that catches the attention is that obviously chatbots distinguish themselves by relying on a conversational interface. And this is an important starting point because it makes the technology unique in the sense that an end user doesn't need to have a lot of insight on how the tool really works. And they can simply use their natural language, the language that they speak day to day, to kick off a dialogue or a process. And we can't stress enough how important this is, especially in view of the change management that is also required to roll out such technology in your environment. We'll come back to that a bit later on. Another eye catcher is the term artificial intelligence. And yes, it's true, chatbots rely on some sort of artificial intelligence, but we have to be a little bit careful, and we want to be a little bit careful in using that term, because AI usually creates expectations about a chatbot being some kind of an entity that sits there, a machine that once you switch it on, it becomes almost autonomous and will completely self-develop. And although machine learning is a key concept behind how chatbots can work and how they can evolve, we should not be trapped by the idea that there's absolutely no effort in setting it up, maintaining it, monitoring it, and checking the performance of the technology. AI is a bit of a black box and a vague concept, but the true magic will happen in what is referred to as NLP. That's an abbreviation for natural language processing. Again, it's a concept that I will clarify a little bit more in detail later on in the presentation. Um, Now, if we have a look at the most common types of chatbots that we have out there on the market, we will see that there's let's say three main categories that vary a little bit in complexity. The most easy, simple ones are the ones that we refer to here as clickbots. And if we want to be a bit more polite, we could say it's a rule-based chatbots. So basically what they do is they rely a little bit less on the language understanding, because you will kind of present a dialogue to the user that he can go through by clicking on certain options that you present to him. This type of chatbot is very useful if you're thinking about bringing processes that are very clear to you, where there's little deviations. So it's kind of a closed concept, and you know upfront really well what the end user actually expects from that process. So in those instances, allowing them to use click buttons will probably be the best fit to the use case. It's a bit similar to a wizard, but obviously the starting point will also be a statement done by the user. Then the next level, and that's the one where it becomes a little bit more exciting, is really the kind of chatbot that relies on text and speech input. So they are very open-ended kind of solutions, where we don't really anticipate upfront how a dialogue will necessarily go. So here, the emphasis on the natural language understanding and processing will be much stronger, and therefore it also becomes a little bit more complicated, because where with the click bots, the rule-based bots, you can upfront very well script and predict the interactions that the end user will have with the chatbot. When moving to something that is solely relying on text and speech input, that becomes a little bit more difficult. Hence, the training efforts that are required to get the chatbot up to a certain level will be higher. A third notion of chatbot would be the proactive chatbot. Now, we will give some examples later on as well in the webinar to explain some use cases. But with this type of chatbot, you actually manage to kind of reverse the starting point of the interaction. So here you have to think of a chatbot that will proactively reach out to the end user and start to engage in a conversation from his side. Now, these are three different types, let's say, of chatbots, but in reality, if we look at full-blown and well-working chatbot solutions that cover a lot of use cases, you will probably be more likely to see a combination of the three. I already mentioned briefly in the cloud definition the abbreviation NLP. So in short, it stands for natural language processing. And basically, if you deep dive more into it, there's even a split there between natural language understanding and natural language generation. But let's just, to keep it a little bit simple, just focus on natural language processing, which regroups the two elements. And it's kind of, let's say, the cornerstone of what chatbot technology relies on. It's kind of mimicking how a human brain works. Now, if we look how NLP in practice work, then we will see actually that you can split up into three phases. And it's very similar to if you would ask, for example, to a linguist on how he would describe how human-to-human communication works. It wouldn't be very much different than how chatbots and NLP are actually working. The first part, obviously, in a communication between humans, but also in a communication between a human and a conversational assistant, is an expression, sometimes also referred to as an utterance. Let's take an example to make it clear. Someone types or says to the chatbot, "I'm sick for the rest of the week." Now, what will happen next is that the NLP engine will take that expression and it will start to dismantle it. So first of all, what it will try to do, it's going to try to look what is actually the intent, the intention of the user that is putting that expression down. Again, it's very similar to what us humans do, although we don't think consciously about these things, but here we are obviously talking about machines in the end. So we have to kind of make it more process-wise and more binary. So the first thing that the NLP does is attribute an intent to that expression. Now, in order for the NLP engine to be able to do that, you will have to train that NLP model with some sample expressions. Because it doesn't know it out of the box. As I said in the beginning, there's artificial intelligence involved, but it's not a matter of just switching on the NLP engine and it will suddenly start to recognize all sorts of expressions. Typically, one would say that you would need to bring in about 20 to 30 examples of a certain expression and train that against the intent so that a conversational assistant and the NLP will recognize it. A second thing that the NLP will do is it's going to try to find some variable information within that expression. And that's what we refer to as entities. So entities, they help us a lot because they bring some additional information that we will need to further on take an action based on the intent. In the example that we gave, the entity could be the part that talks about the period that the person would be sick, so the rest of the week. So what will happen, the NLP will fetch that out of the expression and then we'll translate it into something that is for a computer, for an algorithm, easier to deal with, in this case, some dates. If the entity is missing and you kind of say, yeah, but I need that bit of information, otherwise the statement of someone saying I'm sick doesn't really mean much to me, you could set that entity as a mandatory presence in the expression. And if it's missing because the user hasn't given it to you, he's free to word the way he wants it, then your NLP will automatically prompt the user to give that additional piece of information. A third element that is really important when we talk about the way NLP works is the confidence score. Now, again, this is something that us humans, when we have interactions with each other, that subconsciously we also do. The difference is that we don't have to kind of attribute a score to it. So if someone is telling us something and it's not clear to us, if our confidence is too low, and we're not sure that we know what the intention is of that user, we will either ask him to or her to repeat the question, or if it really doesn't make any sense to us, we might just ask another colleague to join in and to take that question forward. NLP will work in a similar way. So as I said, it's going to attribute a confidence score, which means how sure is the NLP that the intent that it has detected for a certain expression is actually the right one. And this is interesting because you can start to play with that value. Let's say that you customize in your NLP that anything that goes below a confidence score of 70% is not good enough for you. Then you could make sure that in that case, the conversational assistant will reply to the user saying, okay, could you maybe rephrase the question? And if it still goes wrong and the confidence is not increasing, a next step could be for you to decide, okay, let's hand off this conversation to a live agent if your chatbot solution is connected to a live agent platform. The third step, obviously, once we have the intent, we have all the mandatory entities and the confidence score is high enough, is to go into the response side of things. So that could be a text response, get well soon, but it could also be the start of a dialogue that you script. Remember the rule-based chatbots that enter kind of a conversation based on a number of interactions that you can already predict. Or it could be an action, which is more like posting something into a backend system. In this example, it could be to register the sickness of that particular person for the given dates in your HRIS backend system. Now, there's a lot of NLP providers out there on the market, and the quality of those NLP engines can vary a lot. Also, the way you have to train your bot and make sure that he actually gets to a point where in the majority, let's say 80% of the conversations, the confidence is high enough, is highly influenced by a few important features that usually come along with an NLP solution. The first one is the ability to perform some semantical analysis. Now, most chatbot providers will make statements that their NLP is able to cover with a wide variety of languages. Yeah. And they will do eventually. But very often what you see is that, especially in smaller language groups, and I think Dutch is an example of that, it's a smaller market, that will rely on more of a generic NLP algorithm. Yeah. And that might, in the end, increase your efforts to bring the chatbots to the desired level of quality. Now, where it becomes interesting is if that solution brings the ability to have and to perform semantical analysis on the training sentences that you have provided. Just something very simple. Is the NLP able to understand past tenses or future tenses or whatever? Or is it able to understand the difference between an active and a passive sentence? So these are more, let's say, linguistic abilities, but they're very important because if your NLP solution is able to handle these kind of variations, it ultimately means that you will have less training efforts in order to train your chatbot engine. Another one is syntax correction. I think that's an obvious one. We all use messaging apps and we all make a lot of mistakes, probably. Now, just to be clear, I'm not talking about autocorrection, which can be a hassle a lot. This is really about making syntax corrections, so smaller typos. But again, we're dealing here with a machine, and a machine doesn't like vague things, so it likes to have a binary result. So the more accurate the syntax is, also the better it is, and the easier it becomes for the NLP engine to understand what the expression is of an end user. And here it can again vary a lot between different solutions, how strong and how to the point those syntax corrections work. A third element is context management. Now, this is more aimed at improving user experience, but it also, again, helps your performance of your NLP engine. What we mean here is that, and I like to keep on comparing it to human interactions. When we talk to each other, we are very well aware of the context of the conversation that we are having. Now, for a machine, it's again a little bit different because they process things more in a sequential way. So we need to be careful, especially if we're looking at providing conversational solutions, that we don't lose during a dialogue with between a human and a machine the context of that discussion. Just an example, if we go back to what we highlighted before, the person saying I'm sick, and you go through kind of a dialogue which is very much aimed at trying to register the sickness and asking for missing details around the sickness itself. Could be at the end of the conversation that an end user says something like, and what about my meeting with Mr. Jones? Now, that in itself for the chatbots would be very confusing if he didn't remember what context he was in, what meeting. We as humans, obviously, we know that probably what the person is trying to say, yeah, I have this meeting, I'm sick, so can it be cancelled, or can the person be notified that I'm going to be sick? Playing with context management and having sufficient abilities in the NLP to manage these kind of things will ultimately also help the experience of the employee in dealing with the chatbot solution. And then a last one that we want to highlight, it's more of, let's say, a newer kind of feature that we see popping up on the market. It's around sentimental analysis. Now, you could argue whether or not that has a lot of value within the HR domain, but I believe it can bring some value at some point. It works a bit similar to the confidence score that we discussed earlier when going through the NLP. It's kind of attributing again a score between 0 and 100 around the sentiment. And then, for example, when that score is extremely high, that could indicate that the sentiment of the person is not too positive, or vice versa. Depends a bit on how the NLP deals with it. And based on that score, you could, for example, take a decision to not continue having that conversation with the end user through the chatbot, but to immediately hand off the conversation to a live agent if that is set up. Now, when looking at, so I explained a little bit how the NLP works, but I also mentioned from the beginning that we should avoid looking at chatbots as really standalone applications as we know them. They're more of a solution. And when we talk about solution, it means also that ultimately you need to bring different components together. And the NLP part is only one element of it. Obviously, when we want to, let's say, start working with chatbots, we need to provide some channels to the end users in order to be able to reach the chatbots. We like to refer, and we will do that as well later on in the use cases, to MS Teams, because that's, for example, a good tool that is already out there in most work environments. It's very easy to actually link chatbots into your MS Teams. So you have a channel that is actually already existing, that is probably also easy to deploy on different types of devices. So whether it's on PC, obviously, but also on mobile phones, on tablets, etc. And it even brings in some level of authentication already, because your MS Teams client will already know the person that is actually starting the conversation. You might also get some additional information around the language that he wants to talk in. If you have, let's say, a geography with multiple languages, that can also be taken from the settings in your MS Teams. But obviously, there's also other channels that can be used. We've seen also that some companies prefer to place a chatbot as a web widget on their intranet pages so that it's always there. In that case, you can actually customize the whole look and feel of the channel, so that gives a bit more flexibility. You can brand it the way you want it, more easier. But let's say that those three elements around channel enablement are one of the components, of course, that we need to take into account when looking at these type of solutions. Now, at the center of the whole solution sits what we call an orchestrator. Sometimes also referred to as a fulfillment layer. Consider this a bit as a trafficking agent. So it's going to take, in this case, an expression that comes in through the channel and then decide, okay, I got an expression coming from a channel. What do I need to do next with it? In this case, it's clear. It's going to be sent to the NLP engine, and the NLP engine is going to process it, try to find the intent, the entities, look at the confidence score, etc., and send that information back to your orchestrator layer. And in that orchestrator layer, again, either it will go back to the messaging app and provide the answer, or it might decide to go downstream into some integrations, and that could be different things. That could be towards an HR application if you need to post some information or retrieve some information. Could be to a knowledge base, for example, if you're working with FAQs and you have an FAQ database that you want to reuse, then you could fetch the answers actually from that knowledge base, or you could link up to a live chat or a ticketing system to take, let's say, the conversation either to an agent or to deal with it offline or asynchronous at a later point in time. What's also important to point out here is the fact that the conversations itself will usually be stored in a chatbot log. Of course, taking into account GDPR regulations, very often anonymized, so that we can bring it back to actually the user that raised that question. Well, what we want to just bring also here as an opportunity is that those kind of things will also allow you to do a certain level of reporting. That reporting could be really aimed at the chatbot performance to see, okay, how well does the chatbot perform, what intents are mostly hit by people, so that you know, okay, and we need to focus on that element more, so that we can enrich the experience also for the user. But it can also allow you, for example, if you were to consider that, to do some quick polls, and then to employees around well-being, etc. And all that kind of information could then also be retrieved from chatbot logs and then reused later on to make decisions on how to further enhance the solution or to take any other potential actions that you want to link to it. So that was a little bit the theory. Now we would like to share with you a number of use cases. What we're going to show to you are actually mock-ups, so we're not going to have these examples linked to real chatbots, but they are use cases that have been implemented and that work perfectly well with a chatbot solution. We chose 3. There's a lot more that we could bring, but given the time, we decided to bring also a little bit of variation in it, and also try to look maybe at some personas that you probably all have within your organization that could benefit from specific use cases. So in this case, we're looking at Andrew. So Andrew is kind of a field worker, so a field engineer. He doesn't very often, well, he doesn't have a desk, he doesn't have a computer to sit at the whole day. So the way that he needs to have information, or the way he has access to HR information, is a little bit different. For him, it's important that he can reach out to HR and to HR information when it's actually most convenient for him. That could be during a break he has, but that could also be on his way to and from home. So let's have a look at this example. It's actually a kind of an FAQ. You will see that here it's embedded in the MS Teams environment, and Andrew is reaching out to James, who is in this case the persona of the chatbot. It starts with an open question that Andrew raises. He has a question about part-time work. Now that's very open-ended. Imagine that Andrew had that question, had to look for the answer on an intranet or a portal. He would probably have a lot of trouble to navigate to the right pieces of information. Here you can kind of predict how that dialogue would be going, and you give him different options that are clickable. So here it's also a bit rule-based, and that will bring him very quickly to the point of the answers that he's looking for in a very intuitive way for him. What we don't really show in this example, but what can also enhance in the employee experience, is that obviously You could also bring in a level of personalization towards Andrew. So you already know certain things of Andrew, that he's a field worker, maybe how long he's been with the company. Based on that, you could already maybe skip some steps even in this kind of information exchange between him and the chatbot by really going to the point of his particular situation. For that, obviously, you would need to have a system of reference that is connected and that pulls out some information about Andrew, but that would definitely also help to get him much quicker the answers that he specifically requires. So short interactions that probably, because he's not likely to be going on the intranet and look for the information there. So today he might have to turn to HR whenever he finds the time. That might take a bit of time for him to find a good timing. So it's definitely already a bit of workload that you take away also from your HR admins by giving him already these to the point answers at the time that is most convenient for him. The next use case is a bit similar to what we discussed when I explained the NLP, is about Gina. Gina is clearly not feeling well, wants to focus on getting better. She works for the procurement department. She's a very busy person. Had actually planned a lot of meetings today. So instead of having to call HR, getting her laptop out and starting to look into her Outlook inbox and starting to set up out of office assistants and all that, she just wants to be able to send a very quick message to inform that she's ill and then focus on getting better. So how does that look like? Again, it's Gina that starts the conversation. James not aware yet of what's about to come. And then Gina is making the statement that she's not feeling well and that she would like to report her sickness. In this case, James is going to check first if she's already seen a doctor, just to know if he has to ask her, do you know until when? Because if she hasn't been to the doctor, she probably can't say yet when she will be back. In this case, she hasn't because it's early morning. She just doesn't feel well, wants to get the alert out to her organization. So what James will do is he will take that absence, register it in the backend system as an absence for 1 day. And then he also offers some additional help in setting up her out of office assistant, blocking her calendar at least already for today, so that no one tries to schedule any new meetings with her, and eventually also decline a number of meetings that she was supposed to be participating on with the corresponding message. So very easy for Gina. She doesn't need to worry. She doesn't need to go back really into her work stuff. She can just take her mobile device, open up her Teams and send that message to the conversational assistant, and everything is taken care of. The third and last example is also going to be a transactional example, and here we are going to look at the case of the proactive assistant. Jeff is a team manager, a very motivated guy, but he has quite a large team, about 15 people. Company is pretty digitalized, so a lot of requests and workflows go in and out. Some of them are in different applications, and Jeff, sorry, doesn't always have the notion of time, and by the end of the day, he rather goes home and he has maybe a number of outstanding actions still to be taken. So what he's really looking for is something that can help him to navigate also through that administrative part that comes with being a manager in a company. So here you will see that it's the other way around in the sense that it's James that's going to send a message through Teams. So that's very convenient and very powerful because Jeff anyway has his Teams open, so it's just like getting another message. James is polite. He asks if it's a good time for Jeff to review a few items. If Jeff would say no, you could actually also incorporate something like a reminder so that the next request will come, I don't know, maybe the next day or something like that. And then what James is going to do is he's going to show the number of items that are pending. And instead of the end user having to go into the application, open it up and look at all the details, he gets it actually from within his MS Teams, and he can navigate through those different approvals. Here we're talking about a leave request. There's also a training request involved that might be linked to your learning management system, but it's here all in one place. And then a last one is around the self-assessment. There, in this case, the client opted not to have the transaction completed from within the chatbot because there's a few more things to be filled in and to be reviewed. So here he will basically just open the application, but straight into the right place in another browser setting, for example. And that's the proactive use case, I think, where Jeff really gets some kind of consolation that whenever items are due, he's not the one who has to actively continuously monitor that, but he has an assistant that will make him aware of that. So far the use cases, so I'm gonna hand back to Raf because it's time for a bit more interaction.
Yes, thank you, Baldwin, so far. We have a few more slides behind this poll, after this poll, but we would like to hear from you. And just as a notice as well, the answers that you give in the polls are anonymous. We cannot trace who answers what. So we would like to know which of the use cases are the most, could bring the most added value for your organization. Was it use case number one, the FAQ? Was it the use case number two with the illness, with the out of office, with the notification, the automatic notification towards the manager? Was it use case number three, the proactive one, where the bot really acts as an assistant for the manager? Or was it another one that we haven't shown yet? Do you have another use case in mind for your organization? If everybody has filled this in, we will look at the results. Give it a few more seconds. And there we are. Okay, so it's spread out over the three use cases. That's interesting to see. The FAQ one is the most popular, but by a small margin. The illness one really brings a lot of value. We think so as well. And of course, the proactive one is interesting as well for a lot of people. Okay, thank you. We will go through the business value now. Just a few more slides. We've received a number of questions. We will get to them after those last couple of slides.
Okay. So now you have a better understanding of what chatbots are, how the NLP works, what a typical functional architecture looks like, and seen some of the use cases. Let's indeed zoom into some of the most valuable elements that can help driving a business case for an HR chatbot. So over the last decade, we have seen a shift in the attitudes towards how work could and should be organized. And flexibility in work planning has become one of the most important soft benefits for employees. And obviously, we know that all varies depending on the kind of function someone has within a company, but we do know that we are increasingly confronted with a workforce that works largely remote and likes to plan their day according to their personal needs. Unfortunately, we have to add that this has also been articulated now over the past year due to the COVID-19 pandemic. Now, the quote that you see on the slide by Doug Conant, who is the former CEO of the Campbell Soup Company, is kind of summarizing it for us. We all work for organizations that are trying to achieve hard targets and objectives, and obviously we rely on our workforce to accomplish them. Now, our focus as an employer, and more specifically also as an HR function, is to empower our workforce, giving them the best possible context to focus on contributing to those objectives. In short, I think that comes down a little bit to increasing the employee experience. Now, if your workplace acts as a catalyst, you will be able to attract and retain the best personnel and therefore have the right circumstances to achieve all of your enterprise targets. Now, how does a chatbot or a conversational assistant could contribute to that? Well, first of all, chatbots are available 24/7. Now, you could argue that's not such a big deal, perhaps, in comparison to typical HR applications, because they're also usually 24/7 available. But where conversational assistants make a difference is really when we talk about the accessibility and the ease of use. Contrary to applications, and because of the nature of the conversational aspect of it, they are much easier to access and work with. Let's think for a minute how often we use our phones or tablets to send a quick message to a friend or a relative. Now, chatbots work the same way. If you need something from someone, you go to the messaging application and you can send your question in the way you are most familiar with, using natural language. And on top of that, well-designed chatbots will be quick responders and can provide information that is actually very much to the point. So no need to start reading through lengthy pages of information. The essence will be brought to the end user in the shape of a smaller message. Also, no need to understand how applications such and such work. Just kick off the process you're interested in, and the chatbot will guide you through the elementary steps, potentially personalized as well to your own situation. And we believe that if you can live up to this promise by using this technology, having access to HR resources truly becomes 24/7 using a conversational assistant, and not just a theoretical statement because an application is always running. No, we make it easier to access, the accessibility becomes easier, and therefore it's really 24/7 available. Now, ultimately, this notion of easy accessibility from within and outside the typical working environment brings us to another strong selling point of chatbots, which is inclusion. And we've seen in our first use case with Andrew already how we can help, for example, the mobile workers in having access to HR information in a very quick way. Now, chatbots, they can be around everywhere on a mobile device. And because they resemble messaging apps, there are very few conventions to be taken into account. You can start using it without too much understanding of the underlying complexity. And once the messaging app is installed, it can cater for a multitude of purposes. And we have some figures also from a study by Forbes who say that already 60% of the millennials have used chatbots, and it's probably already more of them. And 70% of them have actually reported also positive experiences with them. And because of this, could say that the chatbot could very well become the very first digital HR solution that can be used by everybody, not just the millennials, but really everybody in your organization, which is a step towards increasing inclusion. So far, we have mostly discussed some of the non-tangible business case drivers, which are focused on employee experience. Now, where it becomes more tangible is when we start to look into the scalability of chatbot solutions. Over the last 10 years, let's say many HR departments have been trying to find ways to digitalize some of their processes and services that will support our employees in their day-to-day activities. Now, in many cases, that probably has led to a multitude of applications, all serving different purposes. Or it could be one single application, typically something like a Workday or SuccessFactors, but they might be bundling a lot of functionality into one heavy navigation structure. So it's not a surprise that even with a focus on employee experience, it's sometimes tough for our workforce to keep up with all the understanding, to know what needs doing in which application or which module. And with chatbots, you can simplify the application landscape by taking away that complexity that sits actually in the backend and just create a more unique experience in the front end. Besides that, again, employees don't need to be experts. A chatbot application, because it works based on natural language, it changes the realms. Employees don't need to understand IT or how IT applications work. It's up to IT to understand the employee's language. So inevitably, by using a single interface that can gradually absorb more functionality and is deployed in a completely transparent way for the end user, because they have the messaging app there, and they don't need to worry about additional functionality coming in it, the effort on change management will also be drastically reduced. So let's end with bringing in some more quantifiable parameters, and because cost reductions is obviously always an important driver. And as the net benefit that you will get out of working with these kind of solutions will largely vary on the size of your organization, or the way your HR support is structured, or how mature your digitalization efforts are today. We will share you rather some savings that we anticipate as a percentage. So research already shows that up to 30% of the efforts in dealing with service requests can be absorbed by a chatbot solution. So mapping your own HR service catalog will highlight that the majority of service requests are very repetitive and predictable interactions. So assuming all the non-tangible benefits that we discussed previously, there's a great opportunity to review which of those services are typically of a low complexity and would fit this medium to allow a fast and simplified way of processing. Talking about the FAQs, and we saw that that was a use case that was also quite interesting for this audience. 80% of the FAQs that today go to an HR department should and could be autonomously answered by conversational agents. And that rate can also be met by introducing a level of personalization focused on the employee's statutory situation. That's what I mentioned before. If you have information about the employee, you know who's talking to the chatbot. So you could even bring in more specific responses to the employee. And if you combine that with a proper fallback system, fallback meaning, a ticketing system in case the chatbot does not know the correct answer to a question, a lot of the non-complex and non-ambiguous queries from employees can actually be addressed through a chatbot. The higher the volume of questions, the more operational efficiency will obviously be gained out of this. And then finally, we anticipate long-term up to a 10% reduction on your IT landscape efforts by reducing the effort that you now have to invest on building new applications, deploy them each in their own way, take care of the change management each time, and then obviously the maintenance that comes after that. We already, we explained how bringing chatbots in your digital roadmap will actually allow a fast, more cost-effective way of supporting your long-term strategy around digitalization. And in this case, we really strongly believe that employee experience and IT cost efficiency go hand in hand. So what we're trying to say is that by bringing in a conversational solution into your HR IT roadmap in an intelligent way, will eventually bring you the savings around operational and capital investments that I guess every one of us is seeking for. I hand back now to Raf for the Q&A.
Yes, thank you, Boudewijn. So we have a couple of minutes left. We will try to make the answers short because we've received a couple of questions that we would like to go through. The first question is, this sounds like a solution best suited for a high volume of inquiries. Are chatbots used in any particular size of organization? It's a good question. Thank you for that. It's true there's a cost involved. However, as Boudewijn just explained, there are clear returns as well, both tangible and non-tangible. And so we think that a chatbot can be interesting, an HR chatbot can be interesting as of a couple of hundred employees in a company, let's say 400 or 500, something like that. It's tough to put an exact number on it because it depends, of course, on your landscape, your infrastructure, the use cases that you want to develop, and so on and so on. So that's the first question. I hope that answers the question. If not, please put a follow-up question in the Q&A. We will try and get to that as well. The second question is, how technical is the process of training the technology? Is this something a human resources representative would manage, or is someone with more technical skills required for implementation? Good question. I will I'll answer a bit first, and then maybe Baldwin can pick in. This is definitely something that a human resource representative should be able to do. Those are the people with the knowledge. So it's very interesting. It's very important that they are capable of training it. And what we foresee is we structure the knowledge database in such a way that it is accessible and so trainable by a human resource representative. I don't know if Baldwin wants to add something to that response.
No, I fully agree. I think, in fact, it's what we see in practice is that usually the training of the chatbot, once you are going live with it, and even actually already during the implementation project, but that's another piece of the story, is usually done by business users. Why? Because you still need to be able to do that matching between the expressions, the questions that come in from the end user to an intent. And it's actually the HR department that will know best, okay, this question would fit with this intent. Now, the majority of the user interfaces that the NLP solutions provide are actually very user friendly. So it's really a matter of, you get nice overviews of the kind of questions that the chatbot could not answer. On one side, let's say, of your screen, and on the right side of your screen, you get all the intents, and it's just a matter of matching the two together, clicking a button, and then the algorithm will in the background recompile, and a few minutes later should be able then to actually already pick up on that question. So it's definitely not something that requires any IT skills. I think when you're talking about building dialogues, extensive dialogues, even that could, I think, be done by a business user if you give them some insights. Even that is not really that technically complex. Obviously, where you would need technicians is in the orchestrator layer, so that trafficking agent, because that's where the coding sits, that's where the integration to the connectors work. So for that part, you will still rely on the IT department. But let's say the day-to-day maintenance and care of and training of the chatbot is definitely something that we would also position within the business side of things. So most likely, if we're talking about an HR chatbot, within the HR department.
Okay, thank you. Next question. How to realize added value with chatbots if your company is executing a strict security policy and only allows access to applications from within the company domain space? Good question as well. So that's a tough one. We always advise to use the chat applications that are already in use in the company. If none exist, there's multiple channels that are available to integrate with a chatbot, such as a specific application on your intranet, on your portal. There could be a specific application built into a launchpad, for instance, if that's in use. It depends again on the landscape. I would say integration with those channels is not the most complex aspect of a chatbot. It's more getting the knowledge in there. Training the chatbots is a bit more complex. This should not be an issue, even if your company has very strict security policies. Maybe Baldwin wants to add something to that.
No, again, I think, Raf, you explained it well. I think, yeah, it's very much linked to how your organization is structured. I don't really see any stumbling points. Again, if for example you're looking at channels that already exist, like MS Teams, then on that side around authentication, there would not be really that many of issues, especially if they can already be accessed from outside your corporate environment. So I think, you know, it's to be looked at, of course, and obviously in the context of your specific security architecture. But I think that it should not be really a showstopper to start working with chatbot solutions.
Okay, thank you. Next question was, do you require an LMS, a learning management system, or an internal intranet, internet to support the FAQ, or can this be built into the tool? It's not necessary, definitely not necessary to have a learning management system implemented. Even an internal intranet is not necessary. You have to have the possibility, of course, of a channel to have that conversation with the chatbot. But the FAQ and the knowledge is more in a knowledge database, which can be specifically set up. So that should not be an issue. Another question, and we've had two questions about this, is the integration. What about APIs with major cloud HR? And another question was, where can I find the list of available integrations? I would like to combine those two questions. So good questions again. Those are one of the more complex aspects. Unfortunately, there's not a list of available integrations. Of course, the integrations that we use, that we implement, are through APIs, which are available in the most major cloud HR solutions, such as SuccessFactors, Workday, Cornerstone, and so on. So those are the ones that we try to implement. However, it all depends on the use cases that you want to have implemented at your company to see if an API exists, if we can use it, yes or no. So that is a very specific aspect of the implementation. Maybe Baudouin wants to add something to that as well.
Yeah, I think what probably does exist and helps to let's say move quicker on the integration part is that there are of course some let's say templated examples of how to integrate. So it's not like there is some standard connectors that make the whole end-to-end connection work. Yes, as Raf has described, there are APIs. We know what APIs to use to meet for a certain use case. If it's new use cases, then probably if your HRIS system is mature enough, it will indeed have enough APIs to work around that that complexity. And then it's really a matter of also looking at where, for example, if you look at the orchestrator layer that makes the connection between the systems, where is that positioned and how well can we connect that using the APIs that exist? But I would say, yeah, there's indeed not something like a list of predefined things that you can get out of the box. It's always a bit of reusing especially reusing knowledge and experience that we have had in building previously solutions, and then taking a look at what's available in terms of APIs in the target systems.
Just two more questions, if we can. I see we have 3 more minutes. You mentioned that chatbots can be integrated with SuccessFactors. I presume it also works for the job site built with SuccessFactors. 2 questions regarding that external career site. Yes, the simple answer, the quick answer, yes, it can be built. It's a specific channel, of course. It's also a bit specific because you go outside of the company. So there are certain aspects within security that you need to take into account. But yes, it is possible. And then the last question, and that one I will give to Baudouin as well. Do you have any idea of the level of adoption for blue collars? So adoption is always a very specific attention point. The bot needs to really deliver added value. If not, the adoption can be an issue. And I'm sure Baudouin will have more to say about this.
Yeah, I think it goes a little bit hand in hand with how you communicate as well to the employees and to the blue collars in this case about the tools being available. So we have seen a lot of success there where there was made enough, let's say, publicity, and initially you have to bring some publicity around the tool that you're working with, and then people will start to use it, you know, working with ambassadors within that specific segment of the population that also help referring to those tools. So in the beginning, it's always a bit of a there's always a peak interest in the beginning, for sure, in chatbots, if people are aware of them. If the chatbot is working well and is covering, as Raf said, sufficient use cases and the use cases that really matter to that population, then the adoption will definitely be there. But you have to obviously work on that, yeah? As with any other solution that you have. The real benefit, as we have seen it, is that It's so easily accessible, and people are so used at working with messaging services that it actually is a no-brainer a lot of the time for people to use it. Of course, there's always detractors as well who don't like certain bits of technology. It cannot be avoided, but with the majority of people, and especially again looking at the change in the generations, and that yeah, the majority of workforce now has always been used at working with messaging services. We also see a good adoption within the blue collar segment.
Okay, so that's all the time we have for the questions. I would like to, we would like to get some feedback, of course. So we leave you with the third poll, the third and final poll, where we would love to get some feedback. Just give your honest opinion. We are thinking about doing one more of these webinars regarding HR chatbots, because there are certain topics that we did not discuss, like what does an implementation of an actual chatbot look like? So we're signing off. Please take your time to just give us some feedback on the poll. Thank you, everybody, and see you next time.